The Acer Windows Mixed Reality headset is an incredible way to experience virtual reality. At the end of the show, I'll share how to see my review and how you can win these headsets for your classroom. Student-Driven Hyperdocs, episode 348.
The 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with Vicki Davis. Every weekday, you'll learn powerful, practical ways to be a more remarkable teacher today.
So today we're at ISTE 2018, and we're recording with Katie Bradford and Brett Miller, who have done a presentation today called Student-Driven Hyperdocs. Katie, we're going to start with you. Help people understand, what are Hyperdocs?
Hyperdocs are interactive ways to package your learning in a way that makes sense for kids K-12 in any content area. And a lot of people think that Hyperdocs are just documents with links that kids kind of go through and follow, and then it's very teacher-centered. But what Hyperdocs really are ways to get kids collaborating and interacting with content. So they're interacting with content and interacting with each other.
So a lot of people like to use Google Docs, but I want to go on the record saying my favorite way to use Hyperdocs is actually Google Slides, because you can, when you hit that present, you can kind of lock it in and the kids aren't making changes. But a lot of people do use Google tools for Hyperdocs, right?
Yeah, you can actually use lots of tools. We recommend for primary grades, especially K-1-2, using slides because that makes more sense for them and it's easier for the younger students to manipulate and follow along with. And then we suggest, as you kind of get into the upper grades, using more of documents. But you can use Google Drawings, you can use lots of other tools, and those all fit inside of your Hyperdocs.
So we have a Hyperdoc, which is a document, electronic document where we can collaborate, and kids can either just click or you can actually collaborate and connect together. But Brett, your conversation today was about student-driven Hyperdocs. What do you mean?
Okay, so student-driven learning to me is more of getting the teacher as a facilitator. So getting away from the teacher, like the sage on the stage, into more of where they're facilitating the learning. So what we talk about in our session, we talked about collaboration. So we got our teachers collaborating, we moving around, some like blended learning. So it wasn't all just technology. And I think some teachers are afraid that everything has to be inside the Hyperdoc. And I think that's what we tried to model today, was that the Hyperdoc is just the kind of the station, and you can take a different direction. So we offered that you should have collaboration, making thinking visible. We talked about reflection, and we also talked about voice and choice. So voice and choice to me is my personal favorite part of a Hyperdoc, getting that voice, things like Flipgrid, Padlet, and then also giving choice. Casey Bill has a great thing on her choice boards, and that really inspired me this year of getting that choice out there for students to start their own learning journeys.
And the choice boards are so awesome because you can, have kids color in the square when they do that. I know that sounds really simple, but I was teaching Hyperdocs last week in Akron, Ohio, and I was using Google Slides, and I had everybody add a suggestion for something. And we were actually doing Hyperdocs on Hyperdocs. Okay, so the teachers all found something they learned on a Hyperdoc, and I taught them that as they commented, to color it in. So I could look at a glance and see who hadn't added to the conversation. And they were really driving it, and I was just kind of facilitating conversation. So that's kind of what it's about. Okay, so give us some examples, Katie, of what this looks like when done well.
Well, when it's done well, it makes it so the teacher is not at the front of the room, like Brett said. It allows you to move around the room. It allows you to have mini lessons with the students who actually are struggling or need a reteach, or it might even be your advanced kids, because basically Hyperdocs duplicate yourself. That's what they allow you to do. So you are able to be in more places at once. And so things like Brett was saying, if we build in like visible thinking routines, that's where those student-driven Hyperdocs come alive, and you can see student learning without actually having to grade it. If we build in collaborative opportunities, and so today we did something like a chalk talk, where the teachers actually walked around with markers and paper, which seems funny because it's a tech tool, but we love markers and paper. That's still good for learning. And so that allows students to collaborate. It allows them to talk to each other and still have that face-to-face interaction.
Cool. So Brett, let's say we have a beginner, super beginner, kind of scared. They're using Google Classroom, but they're thinking, okay, I've heard people on the 10-Minute Teacher talk about Hyperdocs a good 15 or 20 shows now. People are talking about it. So it must be pretty cool because teachers say it's useful. But where can they start?
Okay, so the first place I would start would be with the Hyperdoc girls. So hyperdocs.co, I believe, that's where I got my start when I was inspired. I started with just a basic template, and I was telling teachers today that a Hyperdoc to you, or what it looks like or for your classroom, is just going to be completely different. So I started with one, and then I was telling the teachers today, my first one looked really bad. I'm not proud of it, but I would start there. I would go and maybe get on Twitter and look at Hyperdocs or Pinterest, and that's where I really got my ideas. Sharing the teachers share teachers, or teachers give teachers, is a great place to get inspired. Lisa Highfield is all about take something, remix it, sharing the wealth there. So that's why we made our Hyperdoc session available, and it's a Hyperdoc itself. If you're getting into it, we'd love for you to look at ours and maybe get inspired that way.
And we'll put the link for the listeners. And Brett, you should be proud of that first Hyperdoc, because anything worth doing well is worth doing poorly at first. I mean, my kids and I had a laugh at the end of the school year looking back on some of the very first digital films that we were so proud of way back, 12 years ago when we started making films. And now they're so much better. But you know what? I'm kind of ashamed of them. But you have to start somewhere, don't you?
Yeah, it's important to fail forward, I believe, and take risks. That's my big thing for teachers when I'm talking to them. Let's take a risk. It's important to step outside your comfort zone, or what I call my grit zone nowadays, getting outside of what you think is comfortable and getting into that zone of that's not comfortable. Casey Bell talks about that in her Shake Up Learning book of getting outside the comfort zone.
So, Katie, have you ever seen teachers just make massive mistakes when they're starting Hyperdocs? What are those mistakes?
Well, I used to be a teacher, so I know that you definitely do make mistakes. And so, again, a lot of people think Hyperdocs are just a document or slides with links on it for kids to just passively consume the content. And I think if you're going to make one mistake, that's the one you want to avoid. So that way you are actually building in opportunities for them to engage with the content, to interact with the content, and then also with each other, so that way they are learning. Something else that I tell teachers too is in all of the resources, nowhere does it say Hyperdocs have to be pretty. So if you get hung up on how things look, you're going to spend more time with that than the learning process. And so you'll eventually find a way that you like to use it, and you'll get in a template that you like and your students like, and you'll just reuse it and not have to make it over and over again.
Brett, if you could travel back in time to Brett the first day you used a Hyperdoc and you were coaching yourself, and that could actually happen, what would you say to Brett day one, first Hyperdoc?
I would say this is too much. I thought that I needed a Hyperdoc for every single lesson. I needed like 25 Hyperdocs in 1 week. And this,
oh no, I can't believe you did that to yourself. But we do that, don't we?
Yeah. So my first one took me like 8 hours, and I was like, I'm going to, tire out with all this energy. So I would recommend that teachers keep it simple. And that's why we have our 4 things that we focused on in our Hyperdoc session today. Those like voice and choice, again, collaboration, making thinking visible, and getting opportunities to reflect. And I think if you can add those things, then it will be perfect no matter what it looks like.
Awesome. We've gotten so much great advice. And teachers, remarkable teachers, don't you love it when somebody gives us permission not to do too much? Because I know when I first learned all about Web 2.0 tools, I set myself as a goal to do every single one of them in the first week, because I thought I was the only one not doing it. So cut yourself some slack. Do innovate like a turtle and make little progress going forward. Take that 15 minutes once a week. Have your list of the next 3 things to do. But I will tell you this. I waited a little bit of time before I got into Hyperdocs. I didn't get into Hyperdocs until in November 2017. But when I first used it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is a game changer. And it's so easy. It's so easy. So follow these resources, try it out, follow Katie and Brett, and learn more about Hyperdocs, because this is something we can all apply. Read my review of the Acer Windows Mixed Reality Headset at coolcatteacher.com/VR and learn how to enter to win a STEAM Lab Makeover from Acer and Microsoft, who are giving away 10 Acer Windows Mixed Reality headsets and 10 Acer Aspire 7 laptops. Learn how at coolcatteacher.com/VR and see the virtual reality video I shot using my Acer Windows Mixed Reality headset. This is a fantastic tool for your classroom.
Thank you for listening to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. You can download the show notes and see the archive at coolcatteacher.com/podcast. Never stop learning.